He ruled a nation with iron discipline. He negotiated peace between rival countries. He commanded armies with a single sentence. He stood before millions, calm and untouchable. But for 3 long years, he could not say 3 simple words to the woman who loved him most. She was his wife. And he barely looked at her. For years, she lived inside the presidential palace, surrounded by gold chandeliers, guarded gates, and cameras flashing at every public appearance. The world called her lucky. The media called them the perfect power couple. But when the doors closed at night, she ate dinner alone. When speeches ended, she stood behind him, smiling softly, while his hand never once reached for hers. He ruled a country. But he ignored his own marriage. And when he finally realized that the quiet woman beside him was the only heart that truly loved him, she was already dying. If this story moved you, don't let love go unnoticed in your own life. Like this video, subscribe for more unforgettable romance stories, and share it with someone you care about, before it's too late. His name was Alexander Vale. At 38, he became the youngest president in the country's modern history. Brilliant, strategic, disciplined, a man raised on ambition rather than affection. His father had been a decorated general. His mother, a diplomat who believed emotions were weaknesses that powerful men could not afford. Alexander grew up learning one lesson above all others. Feelings slow you down. By 25, he had graduated top of his class. By 30, he was a rising political star. By 35, he had defeated opponents twice his age. And by 36, he was married. Not for love. For stability. For alliances. For image. Her name was Elena Marquez. Unlike Alexander, Elena grew up in warmth. Her father was a university professor. Her mother ran a small foundation for women's education. Their home was full of books, music, and long dinner conversations. Elena met Alexander long before the presidency, at a fundraising gala for educational reform. She had been invited to speak about literacy programs for underprivileged girls. He noticed her intelligence first. She noticed his loneliness. While others admired his confidence, Elena saw something different, a man who never laughed freely, who measured every word before speaking. They spoke that night for nearly an hour. He asked about policy. She asked about purpose. He was intrigued. She was captivated. When their families later encouraged a formal union, citing shared values and compatible public images, Alexander agreed with calculated logic. Elena agreed with quiet hope. She thought love could grow. He thought respect was enough. Their wedding was broadcast nationwide. Headlines read: "A new era begins, President Vale marries scholar and humanitarian." She wore ivory silk and a soft smile. He wore composure. From the outside, they were flawless. Inside the palace, however, reality was colder. The presidential residence was magnificent, marble floors, vaulted ceilings, long corridors echoing with footsteps. But their bedroom doors were separate. Their schedules rarely aligned. Breakfast was often taken at different times. Dinner, if shared, was formal and brief. Alexander never insulted her. He was never cruel. He provided everything: security, status, comfort. But affection? That was absent. The first year, Elena tried. She rearranged her schedule to match his late nights. She attended every public event by his side, memorizing the names of ambassador spouses. She learned diplomatic etiquette with precision. When he returned exhausted from meetings, she would wait in the sitting room with tea prepared just the way he preferred: no sugar, 1 slice of lemon. "Thank you," he would say politely. Then disappear into his office. She told herself he was adjusting. Leadership was heavy. Power required sacrifice. Love required patience. On their first anniversary, Elena planned a private dinner in the East Wing balcony. She asked the staff to dim the lights, ordered his favorite meal, and even wore the deep blue dress he once said suited her. She waited. 9 o'clock passed. 10. At 11, a secretary informed her he had been called into an emergency security briefing. He did not return until after midnight. The candles had melted into wax pools. The food was cold. She was still sitting there. "I'm sorry," he said calmly, removing his cufflinks. "National matters." She nodded. Of course. She never mentioned it again. The second year was quieter. She stopped planning surprises. She stopped waiting by the door. Instead, she began filling her time with charity projects. Education reforms. Women's healthcare initiatives. She built programs across rural provinces. The public adored her. Compassionate First Lady, they called her. Alexander admired her efficiency. But admiration is not love. Sometimes, during televised speeches, the camera would cut to Elena's face in the audience. She always watched him with the same soft expression, pride mixed with something deeper. Longing. He never noticed. Or perhaps he did, and chose not to respond. One evening, after a particularly heated debate in Parliament, Alexander returned earlier than usual. He found Elena asleep on the couch in the private library, a folder of children's literacy proposals resting on her lap. A strand of hair had fallen across her cheek. For a brief moment, he stood there watching her. Something stirred, unfamiliar and uncomfortable. He brushed it aside. Work awaited. By the third year, silence became routine. They spoke about logistics. Travel schedules. Press statements. But not about feelings. Not about dreams. Not about the distance stretching invisibly between them. The palace staff noticed first. The way she lingered in rooms after he left. The way she stared at her phone when he missed calls. The way her laughter became softer. At public banquets, other leaders would toast their spouses affectionately. Alexander would raise his glass to the nation. Elena would clap politely. Late at night, alone in her room, she began writing letters. Not to send. Just to release the ache in her chest. "Today you looked tired," one letter read. "I wish I could carry some of your burden." Another said, "I know you don't love me yet. But I am still here." She kept them in a velvet box inside her dresser. Hope stored neatly, like folded silk. One winter morning, during a live press conference, a journalist asked Alexander how he balanced leadership with family life. He answered smoothly. "My wife understands the responsibility of this office. We are united in service." Elena watched from a private viewing room. United. The word echoed strangely. That night, she stood at the doorway of his study. "Are you free for a moment?" she asked gently. He didn't look up from his documents. "Make it quick." She hesitated. "I was thinking, perhaps we could take a short trip after the summit next month. Just 2 days." He signed a paper. "That's unrealistic. The economy review begins the following week." "I understand," she whispered. He finally glanced at her. "You knew what this position required when you married me." The words weren't harsh. But they were final. She closed the door quietly. That was the night something inside her began to fade. Not love. But expectation. She stopped asking for trips. Stopped waiting for shared meals. Stopped imagining late-night conversations. She fulfilled her duties flawlessly. She smiled for cameras. She stood beside him in photographs. But inside, she felt herself becoming transparent. A presence without presence. A wife without intimacy. And Alexander? He remained focused. Approval ratings rising. International recognition growing. He believed everything important was under control. He did not notice that the woman who once watched him with shining eyes now avoided meeting his gaze for too long. He did not notice that her shoulders seemed smaller beneath silk gowns. He did not notice that she had begun sleeping with the lights off, because darkness hurt less than hope. The nation praised him. The world respected him. But in the quiet corners of the palace, a marriage was quietly unraveling. And neither of them yet understood, that time was already running out. The silence between them did not arrive suddenly. It settled slowly, like winter frost creeping across a windowpane. At first, it was small things. Missed breakfasts. Unanswered messages. Cancelled evenings that were never rescheduled. Elena told herself it was temporary. National budgets. Security briefings. Diplomatic crises. A president's schedule was not his own. So she adapted. She stopped calling during his meetings. Stopped waiting in shared lounges. Stopped asking if he would return early. Instead, she began leaving small gestures behind, quiet reminders that someone cared for him beyond politics. A handwritten note beside his morning coffee. Don't forget to rest. A scarf folded over his office chair during winter. A book she thought he might enjoy, marked at passages about leadership and compassion. He acknowledged them politely. But never responded emotionally. One evening, she waited outside the grand hall after a state banquet. Foreign dignitaries were leaving, cameras flashing as couples exited together. She stood at the foot of the marble staircase, elegant in silver, hoping, just once, he might walk beside her instead of ahead. Alexander descended the steps surrounded by advisors. When he reached her, he paused only briefly. "The car is ready," he said. Then continued walking. She followed 2 steps behind, the distance invisible to cameras but painfully real to her heart. The next morning, headlines praised the event. President Vale and First Lady radiate strength and unity. She stared at the photograph printed across the front page. He stood tall. She stood beside him. But even in the still image, the space between their shoulders looked vast. By midwinter, the palace staff noticed her routine changing. She ate less at formal dinners. Spent more time in her private office. Worked longer hours on charity programs, especially hospital funding initiatives. Hospitals became her refuge. There, she was not a neglected wife. She was needed. Children smiled when she entered wards. Nurses thanked her for new equipment funding. Doctors briefed her on patient recoveries. She listened attentively, warmth returning to her voice. Sometimes she stayed past visiting hours, sitting beside sick children until they fell asleep. Pain, she found, was easier to face when it belonged to others. One afternoon, while touring a newly funded oncology wing, a young patient handed her a paper drawing. It showed a stick-figure family, a mother, father, and child holding hands. "Is this your family?" Elena asked gently. The child nodded. "Does your father visit often?" "Every day," the girl said proudly. "Even when he's busy." Elena smiled. But when she turned away, her eyes filled. That night, she returned to the palace later than usual. Alexander was already in his study reviewing policy drafts. She paused at the doorway again, a habit she hadn't quite broken. "You're home late," he said without looking up. "I visited the children's hospital." He nodded faintly. "Good work." She lingered. "There's something I wanted to ask." A pause. "Yes. Do you ever regret it?" He finally looked up. "Regret what?" "Our marriage." The question hung in the air like fragile glass. He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful but not emotional. "No. It was strategically sound." "Strategically sound." "Not meaningful." "Not cherished." "Strategically sound." She gave a small nod. Of course. And left the room before her voice could betray her. That night, she did not write a letter. She simply stared at the blank page for hours. The breaking point came 3 months later. It was her birthday. She had not reminded him. Had not planned anything. But a small part of her still wondered if he would remember. The palace staff did. Flowers filled her office. Charity partners sent gifts. Even foreign ambassadors' spouses called with well wishes. But from Alexander, nothing. Not a message. Not a call. Not a passing acknowledgement in the hallway. She told herself it didn't matter. Until evening arrived. A formal economic summit dinner had been scheduled that night. She attended beside him, wearing a soft rose gown gifted by her mother years earlier. Throughout the dinner, leaders toasted progress and prosperity. Near dessert, one visiting prime minister raised his glass toward Elena. To the First Lady, may her birthday be filled with joy. The hall erupted in polite applause. Alexander froze mid-sip. He turned slowly toward her. A flicker of realization crossed his face. But it was too late. The damage had landed in front of an entire diplomatic assembly. He leaned closer and whispered. You should have reminded my office. Not I'm sorry. Not happy birthday. She smiled gracefully for the cameras. But inside, something broke completely. Later that night, she sat alone in her room, the unopened gift stacked nearby. She removed her wedding ring for the first time since their ceremony. Not angrily. Gently. As though placing down something fragile that had already cracked. Over the following weeks, her health began to decline quietly. Fatigue lingered. Frequent dizziness. Persistent coughs she hid behind polite handkerchief gestures. She visited palace physicians privately, insisting the reports remain confidential. Tests were conducted. Follow-up scheduled. She told no one. Especially not him. One evening, she collapsed briefly in her office. Doctors urged rest. Further examinations. She agreed, but only under one condition. No presidential notification. Meanwhile, Alexander remained absorbed in governance. Trade negotiations. Defense reforms. Election forecasts. He noticed she attended fewer late-night functions but assumed she was focusing on charity logistics. He did not ask. Then came the night that ended everything. She had requested, weeks in advance, that he attend the opening ceremony of a national children's hospital she had spent 2 years funding and building. It meant everything to her. He had agreed through his scheduling team. But hours before the event, a political crisis erupted, a coalition dispute threatening legislative control. His advisors urged immediate strategy meetings. He chose politics. He sent a brief message through an aide. The president will be unable to attend due to urgent national matters. She read the message backstage at the ceremony. Hundreds of donors were present. Children lined the hall with flowers. Her speech notes trembled slightly in her hands. She stepped onto the stage anyway, smiling, poised, dignified. But when she looked at the empty VIP chair reserved for him, her voice faltered for the first time in public life. That night, she returned to the palace past midnight. He was in the war room with advisors, debating policy survival. She did not interrupt. Instead, she walked quietly to their bedroom wing. She packed a single suitcase. No designer gowns. No jewels. Just personal items. Letters. Medical reports. And the velvet box of unsent confessions. She removed her wedding ring again, this time leaving it on his study desk. Beside it, she placed a letter. Simple. Handwritten. Grateful in tone, not bitter. By dawn, she was gone. No press announcement. No public scandal. The First Lady had simply left the presidential residence. When Alexander returned to his study the next afternoon, exhausted from negotiations, he noticed the ring first. It gleamed beneath the desk lamp. Unfamiliar in its stillness. He frowned slightly, then saw the letter. He opened it. Her handwriting was delicate but steady. You gave me honor, protection, and a name respected by millions. For that, I am grateful. But a marriage cannot survive on duty alone. I release you from the weight of loving someone you never chose to love. Please take care of your health. Elena. He read it twice. Not in shock. But in quiet confusion. Release him? From what? He placed the letter down, assuming she had gone to her family estate temporarily. Days passed. Then weeks. The palace felt different. No fresh flowers in corridors. No quiet music from her sitting room. No handwritten notes beside his morning coffee. Staff interactions grew formal. Meals were served without warmth. One evening, unable to sleep, he wandered into her former office. It had been left untouched. On her desk sat the velvet box. He opened it. Inside were dozens of letters. All addressed to him. All unsent. He unfolded one slowly. You looked tired today. I wanted to hold your hand, but I wasn't sure if you'd let me. Another. I know you don't love me yet. But I'm still hoping. Another, dated just weeks earlier. If I disappear one day, I hope you'll finally rest. His chest tightened unexpectedly. For the first time, the powerful president felt something he could not command away. Emptiness. He stood alone in the silent office, surrounded by words she had never spoken aloud. And for the first time in 3 years. Alexander Vale felt powerless. Alexander Vale did not sleep that night. He did not eat. He did not attend meetings. The presidential residence, usually alive with activity, felt empty and echoing. He wandered the corridors aimlessly, passing rooms where her laughter had once softly filled the corners. Each echo reminded him of what he had ignored, what he had taken for granted. For 3 years, he had believed he was invincible. A man who could shape nations, command armies, and outmaneuver rivals. But now, powerless, he faced a reality he could not govern. The woman he had neglected had left. And she was nowhere to be found. At first, he assumed she had retreated to her family estate. He sent aides to inquire. No response. Weeks passed. He expanded the search, former friends, charities she had worked with, hospital administrators. Nothing. Each lead ended in silence. Finally, Alexander authorized a discreet investigation. Private investigators combed the city, contacting friends, colleagues, even distant relatives. And then, one morning, a message arrived. She had been spotted in a small seaside town several hours away, living quietly, far from media, far from politics. He did not wait. He left immediately. No press, no entourage. Just himself and a rented car. The town was modest. Its streets narrow and quiet, a stark contrast to the marble halls and flashing cameras of the palace. He drove past a small cafe where she often sat writing letters. He parked down the street and watched from afar. She looked different. Thinner. Paler. But stronger. The weight of neglect had carved lines in her face, yet she moved with grace, carrying herself with quiet dignity. He stepped out of the car and approached. She noticed him almost immediately, yet she did not move. Her eyes widened slightly, not with fear, not with anger, but with measured calm. Alexander, she said softly. He stopped a few feet away, uncertain how to begin. I've been looking for you, he said finally. She nodded. I know. The first words he had spoken to her with true emotion in years trembled in the cold morning air. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She remained silent, watching him carefully. He tried to explain, but the words faltered. How could he justify 3 years of absence? 3 years of ignoring her? 3 years of taking her presence for granted? "I never realized," he said finally, choking slightly, "how much I needed you. How much I've failed you." She looked away, scanning the horizon over the ocean. "You took your time," she said quietly. "I waited. I hoped. I tried to be patient. But hope fades eventually." Her calm tone cut deeper than any argument could have. He lowered his head. "I understand," he said, though he did not truly. "Not yet." She invited him to sit. They walked along the sandy shoreline together, the waves breaking softly at their feet. For the first time in years, Alexander simply watched her. Not as a president watching a citizen. Not as a man measuring duty and loyalty. Just as a husband who had finally realized what love meant. For 2 days, he stayed with her. He learned about her life in the town, how she spent her time quietly helping children, volunteering at the clinic, tutoring underprivileged students. She had built a sanctuary away from politics, away from the glare of cameras, away from him. He thought the pain of absence was enough. He was wrong. On the evening of the second day, while helping her sort through old letters and documents, he noticed a small envelope with the letterhead of a hospital in the corner of her desk. He picked it up. "What's this?" he asked softly. Elena's face paled slightly, and she avoided his gaze. "It's nothing," she said, but her fingers betrayed her. They trembled slightly. He pressed gently. "I need to know." Finally, she took a deep breath and sat down, gripping the envelope. "I'm sick," she said quietly. He froze. "Terminal," she continued, tears threatening to fall. "I didn't want you to know. I didn't want to become another burden while you carried a nation on your shoulders." Silence. The wind. The ocean. Her words echoing in his chest. I should have noticed," he whispered. "You should have loved me," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hand. The next days became a blur. He arranged consultations with the best doctors. Specialists flew in. Medications arrived from abroad. But she refused aggressive treatment. "You can save nations, Alexander. But you cannot save time," she said quietly. He stayed by her side constantly. For the first time in their marriage, Alexander was fully present. He cooked her meals, awkwardly but sincerely. He read her favorite books aloud. He held her hand through every appointment, every tremor, every quiet evening. And through it all, he begged for forgiveness. Not with words, but with presence. Not with power, but with love. The town's lighthouse became their sanctuary. Each night, he would sit beside her, watching the moonlight dance across the water, whispering apologies over and over, wishing he could trade every accolade, every victory, every triumph for just one more day with her. The inevitable day arrived quietly. She called him to her bedside. "If there's another life," she whispered, her voice fragile, "will you choose me first?" Before he could respond, she reached for his hand. He took it, holding it tightly. "Yes," he said immediately, tears spilling freely. "Before the presidency. Before power. Before everything." She smiled faintly. And then she let go. Her breathing slowed. He held her, feeling the warmth leave her body. Flatline. The room was silent. The ocean outside whispered against the shore. Alexander Vale, the man who had commanded nations, wept. He had conquered the world, but could not conquer love lost. Weeks later, he resigned from the presidency quietly. No press. No ceremony. He returned to the seaside town, visiting her grave daily. He read her letters aloud, the ones she had written over years, unsent, full of hope, full of love, full of faith in him he had ignored. He lived in her memory, learning at last the lesson that had eluded him for decades. Power is fleeting. Influence is temporary. Titles fade. But love, if neglected, may be lost forever. And in his solitude, Alexander understood the cost of waiting too long. He had finally fallen desperately in love, but it was tragically, painfully, irrevocably late. If this story moved you, don't let love go unnoticed in your own life. Like this video, subscribe for more unforgettable romance stories, and share it with someone you care about, before it's too late.